They say your husband is supposed to be your protector, your best friend, the one person you can rely on when the world turns cold. That's what they tell little girls when they hand them dolls and dress them in white at Sunday school. But no one ever says what you're supposed to do when your husband is the monster in the dark, when the man who put a ring on your finger is the same man who turns your bones to bruises and your breath into silence. My name is Eleanor Grace Mitchell. Most folks just call me Ellie. I'm 84 years old and I live in a quiet little town in North Carolina, in a house that smells of lavender and old books. I sit on my porch most mornings, sipping sweet tea and watching the trees sway like old dancers. I have gray hair now, pulled up in a bun the way my mama taught me. My hands tremble a little when I hold my tea, not from age, not only age, but from the echoes of things I never said out loud. Until now. This isn't easy for me. I've kept my mouth shut for more than 60 years, not because I was scared, not in the end, but because I thought if I locked the past away, it would stop haunting me. Turns out, silence just makes ghosts feel more at home. Why now? Why speak up when I've got more yesterdays than tomorrows? Because last week, my great-granddaughter came to me. She's only 15, bright eyes, curious heart. She said, "Grandma Ellie, have you ever been in love?" And I couldn't answer her. Not truthfully. Not without unwrapping all the hurt I've spent my whole life burying. The truth is, I didn't know what love felt like until the day I stopped being afraid of dying. You see, I married a man named Walter Mitchell when I was just 17. That name still tastes like ash in my mouth. Everyone thought he was charming, tall, polite, church-going. My father liked him. Mama thought he had a good job and a good smile. And back then, that was all a girl needed to hear. I was young and stupid, and I believed people when they said, "He'll take care of you." They were half right. He did take care of me. The same way a spider takes care of a fly once it's caught in the web. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story isn't just about Walter. It's about me. It's about survival. About the slow unraveling of a girl who learned to make herself small enough to fit inside the spaces of a house that felt more like a cage. And it's about the fire, real fire, that finally set me free. If you're hearing my voice right now, please, leave a comment below and tell me where you're from. I want to know if my story is reaching anyone. I want to feel less alone. Sometimes, just knowing someone's out there listening makes all the difference. Now, let me take you back before the screams behind closed doors, before the broken plates and broken promises, before I wore long sleeves in July just to hide the marks, back when I still believed in fairy tales, back when I was just Ellie Barnes, the girl who thought love meant keeping quiet, because sometimes the story you've never told is the one that holds all the pieces of who you really are. And this is mine. I was born in 1939 in a small cotton town you wouldn't find on a map unless you looked real close. My daddy worked in the mill. Rough hands, kind voice. My mama, she kept the house in order, made sure we had cornbread on the table and church clothes pressed on Sunday. We didn't have much, but we had decency. Clean floors, good manners, and the kind of silence you only find in houses where people don't talk about feelings. We lived in a wooden house with chipped white paint, the front porch wrapped around like a ribbon on a box. Summer mornings smelled like biscuits and honeysuckle. I used to run barefoot through the garden, collecting dandelions and pretending they were gold coins. My younger brother, Henry, followed me everywhere with a slingshot in his pocket and dirt on his face. We didn't have toys like children do now, but we had the woods, the creek, and each other. My room was upstairs. Second window to the left. The wallpaper peeled at the corners and the floor creaked when you tiptoed, but to me it felt like a palace. I used to sit by the window and write poems in my notebook, dreaming about the world beyond our fence. I wanted to be a school teacher, maybe a poet. I imagined myself in a big city someday, wearing red lipstick and walking fast with purpose. Mama used to say I had too much imagination for my own good, but those early years, they were good, they were soft, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. The truth is, not everything in my life was darkness. There were warm pies cooling on the windowsill and old gospel songs playing on the radio. There were fireflies in mason jars and bedtime prayers whispered between sleepy giggles. Those memories are mine, and I hold them like precious stones. The trouble didn't come all at once. It came like a slow shadow crawling across the floor. I remember the first time I noticed something was different about how people looked at girls. I must have been around 10. I was wearing a blue gingham dress Mama made for me, and I was walking to church with my parents. One of the older men, Mr. Krause, who owned the feed store, looked me up and down in a way that made my skin crawl. He smiled too long. His eyes stayed too low. I didn't understand what it meant, not really, but I remember feeling embarrassed, ashamed, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. I told Mama that night that I didn't want to wear that dress again. She just told me not to be silly. It was the first time I swallowed something that didn't sit right, buried it deep down, and tried to forget. That would become a pattern. Back then, girls were raised to obey, to be quiet, to be good. And good meant agreeable, helpful, silent when it counted. Mama used to say, "Don't start trouble. Don't make a fuss. A woman's job is to hold the family together, not tear it apart." So I learned to hold my tongue, to make myself smaller, to fold myself into shapes that pleased other people. I was a good student, always top of my class. My teachers liked me because I listened. I stayed out of fights, never questioned rules, and brought the teacher apples even when we could barely afford them. My dreams of being a poet stayed tucked between pages of spiral-bound notebooks I kept under my mattress. But sometimes, when I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw two Ellies, the one everyone saw, neat, polite, soft-spoken, and the one that lived in my chest, banging on the walls, wanting to run. At 15, I started working part-time at the bakery down on Main Street. That's where I met Walter. He was older, 19, maybe 20, with slicked-back hair and a confident walk. He wore a brown leather jacket and always smelled like tobacco and aftershave. He'd lean on the counter and call me darlin', his eyes never quite meeting mine. I remember thinking he looked like someone from a movie. The first time he left me a note with my tip, it said, "You're prettier than you think." I blushed for hours. Back then, no one taught girls about red flags. We thought attention meant value. And I, the good girl, the quiet one, thought maybe I'd finally been seen. So I smiled back. I wrote his name in the margins of my notebook. I started to imagine a future, one where he was the leading man and I was the girl who got chosen. I didn't know then that monsters don't look like monsters at first. Sometimes they look like dreams. Sometimes they smell like aftershave and tell you you're special. Walter started walking me home from work, said it wasn't safe for a girl to be out alone, especially after dark. I remember how that made me feel, like I mattered, like someone cared. Nobody had ever said it to me quite like that before. He'd bring me little things, a chocolate bar, a cheap bracelet, a comb wrapped in a handkerchief. Nothing expensive, but back then, even a trinket felt like a treasure. He always had this look in his eyes, like he was watching me closer than anyone else ever had. At first, it made me feel chosen. Later, it made me feel trapped. My daddy didn't like him. He said Walter was too slick for his own good, said a man who smiled that much was hiding something. Mama just told me, "It's time you started thinking about settling down. You can't be a little girl forever." That's the thing about growing up back then. Your life wasn't your own. It was a hallway of expectations, and every door led to a kitchen or a cradle. I remember the first time Walter got angry with me. I was 16. We were at the fair, and I laughed at something another boy said, a boy I'd grown up with, nothing more than a neighbor. Walter's jaw tightened, and his hand found my arm firm and fast like a snake. He pulled me aside behind the popcorn stand and said, "You don't laugh at other men's jokes when you're with me. Makes you look cheap." His grip left a bruise. I told Mama I fell getting off the Ferris wheel. That should have been the end, shouldn't it? But it wasn't, because he showed up the next day with flowers and apologies, talking about how he lost his temper, how he just cared too much, how it would never happen again. And I believed him. Because that's what you do when you've been raised to give second chances before first warnings. He asked Daddy for my hand a few months later. I remember the way Daddy's mouth tightened into a straight line. He didn't say much, but he didn't fight it either. Walter had a steady job at the hardware store, and in our town, that was good enough. We were married on a rainy April morning in 1956. I wore Mama's wedding dress, altered by hand to fit my smaller frame. It felt heavy on my shoulders, and I don't just mean the fabric. Walter smiled for pictures, said all the right things, tucked a daisy into my hair before we walked down the church steps. People clapped. I smiled too, but something inside me was already wilting. It didn't take long after the wedding for the walls to start closing in. He wanted to know where I was at all times, what I wore, who I spoke to. I wasn't allowed to go to the bakery anymore. He said it was unseemly for a married woman to work. I didn't protest. I'd been taught not to. Besides, there was something in his voice that made the air in the room thin. He didn't hit me at first. No, it was quieter than that. He'd say I was too dumb to hold a job, that I should be grateful he married me when he could have had someone prettier, someone with more curves or a softer voice. He'd make fun of the way I talked when I got nervous. He'd tell me my poems were childish and boring. I stopped writing. I started wearing the clothes he picked out. Neutral colors. Nothing too tight, nothing too bright. He said only cheap women wore red. He began keeping the money in a locked drawer. I had to ask for coins to buy bread. If I asked twice in a week, he'd give me the look. You know the one. The look that said, careful. My world got smaller by the day. I stopped seeing my friends. They stopped calling. I was always too tired or not feeling well. But really, I just didn't want them to see what I was becoming or what he was turning into. The first slap came on a Wednesday. I can still hear the sound, like a firecracker in a silent room. I'd burned the pork chops, just a little. The edge was blackened, that's all. He threw the plate across the room. It shattered against the wall, and then he turned on me. His hand moved so fast I barely saw it coming. My cheeks stung, my ears rang, and I stumbled backward into the stove. He stood over me, breathing hard, eyes narrowed. "Look what you made me do," he said. I didn't cry. Not until later, when he went to bed and I curled up on the kitchen floor next to the broken pieces of that plate. I stared at them for a long time, thinking how something so beautiful can be destroyed in a second and nobody even blinks. The next morning, he kissed my forehead like nothing had happened, and I convinced myself I was overreacting. That's the thing about abuse, especially the kind that doesn't always leave bruises. It makes you doubt your own memory. It wraps itself in excuses and apologies. It tells you this is what love looks like, and you should be lucky anyone wants to love you at all. I stopped speaking up. I stopped asking questions. I learned to smile at the right moments and nod when he told his stories at church socials. And the more I disappeared inside myself, the more he liked me. I remember the night everything truly changed. Not the day we married, not the first slap, not even the day I stopped writing. It was the night I lost the last piece of myself. It was late autumn, the kind where the air smells like dying leaves and burnt wood. I'd made meatloaf, the kind Walter liked, heavy on the onions, mashed potatoes on the side. I thought, if I made it just right, maybe he'd smile at me again like he used to. Maybe we could be something closer to what I thought we were supposed to be. But he came home drunk. I could smell the whiskey before I even heard his boots on the porch. That sound? His boots stomping the porch. It still echoes in my bones. Each step told me what kind of night I was about to have. He walked in, slammed the door so hard the cross above the coat rack fell to the floor. He looked at the plate I'd made and said nothing, just stared. I tried to make my voice light. "Meatloaf tonight, just like you like it." He sat down, looked at me with eyes that weren't really seeing. Then, without a word, he flipped the plate off the table. It shattered against the wall, bits of food and glass everywhere. He stood up slow, walked toward me with that tilt in his body that only came out when he drank too much. That's when I saw the belt. Walter didn't speak. He just unbuckled it like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, like it was just part of the ritual. And I stood there, frozen, my body already bracing. But this time, it wasn't my back or my arm. It wasn't hidden. He struck me across the face, once, hard enough to knock me down. My mouth filled with blood, and I tasted metal and soap and something sour. I crawled backward until I hit the wall, pressing myself into the corner like maybe I could disappear into the paint. He leaned over me and hissed, "If you ever embarrass me again, I'll make sure you don't get back up next time." Then he walked upstairs, just like that. I didn't move for an hour. My left cheek was swelling and one of my teeth was loose. I remember the cold of the floor against my hip, the way the glass from the broken plate dug into my leg, and the sting of tears that refused to fall because I didn't want to give him that. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when I got up and cleaned the mess. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the girl staring back. Her lip was split, her eye red and swelling, her jaw already turning purple. But what got me, what made my knees buckle, was the look in her eyes. She looked hollow, like a ghost. That was the night I stopped believing help was coming. I had gone to the preacher once, Reverend Thomas, after the first few months of marriage. I didn't give details, just said, "Sometimes Walter scares me." Reverend Thomas didn't even look up from his tea, just said, "It's a wife's job to calm her husband, Eleanor. A woman's spirit should be gentle, not rebellious. God honors obedience." I never went back. I tried Mama once, too. I hinted, asked if it was normal for a man to get mad sometimes, real mad. She sighed and said, "Men have tempers. You just keep the house clean and your mouth shut and you'll be fine." That's when I knew no one was going to save me. So I stopped reaching out. I stopped talking to friends. I stopped writing poems. I even stopped going out unless Walter told me to. My world became that house, those walls, his moods, and the worst part was nobody noticed. Or maybe they did. Maybe they just didn't want to. You start to believe the silence. You start to believe you deserve it. The bruises, the control, the way he smiles in public and breaks you in private. You start to believe that this is just your life now, and anything else is just a fantasy you don't get to have. People always ask, "Why didn't you leave?" But they never ask, "Where could you go?" I didn't have a job. I didn't have money. I didn't even have a driver's license. Walter made sure of that. Every part of my life had to go through him. But I'll tell you something. That night, when I wiped the blood from my mouth and stared at my reflection, something inside me shifted. It wasn't big, not yet, just a flicker. But it was the first flicker of the fire. It would take years, before it grew strong enough to burn everything down. But it started right there, with a girl crouched on the kitchen floor, bleeding, alone, and beginning, just barely, to want something more. After that night, things didn't get better. They got worse, not all at once, but like a slow tightening around my throat. Walter changed in ways I didn't have words for. He drank more, shouted louder, and the gaps between his anger grew shorter. Some days, I'd wake up and know it was going to be bad just by the way he shut the door. Other days, he was quiet, almost sweet. The kind of sweet that made me forget for a few minutes that I was living in a house built on fear. It's strange, the way hope clings to you, even when it's killing you. I'd think, maybe today he'll see me. Maybe today he'll remember the way he used to hold my hand at the movies. Maybe if I do everything just right. But you can't negotiate with a storm. You can't reason with a man who only feels powerful when you're scared of him. I became an expert at reading silence. I could tell what mood he was in by the way his boots hit the floorboards. I knew how to fold the laundry just the way he liked. I knew to never cook pork chops again, and I knew to keep the blinds shut if he hadn't slept well. My entire life was a series of calculations. Keep him calm, keep myself invisible. And the worst part? I got good at it. So good, in fact, that no one outside that house had any idea what was going on. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple. Walter was charming, always shaking hands, offering to fix people's cars, tithing at church. People loved him. They'd say, "You're so lucky, Ellie. Not many women have a man who provides like that." Lucky, if they only knew. I think the loneliness hit harder than the bruises. There's a kind of ache that comes from knowing no one sees you, really sees you. I used to sit in the bathroom with the door locked, pretending to clean just so I could cry without him hearing. I'd muffle the sound with a towel in my mouth. And then came the day that almost broke me. I had found a photograph. It was nothing really, just an old picture of me and my brother Henry when we were little. We were barefoot in the garden, grinning like fools, dirt on our knees. I'd tucked it into the back of a drawer, something to remind me that I was once someone else. Walter found it. I don't know why it made him angry. Maybe because I'd hidden something. Maybe because I smiled in that photo in a way I didn't anymore. But he flew into a rage, tore the picture in half, then quarters, screamed about how I was always living in the past, how I wasn't grateful, how I was too stupid to know what a good life was. Then he pushed me, hard. I hit the floor, hit the edge of the dresser, and for a moment the world went black. When I came to, I was on my side, cheek pressed against the hardwood, blood dripping from my temple. And Walter? He was pacing the room like a caged animal, muttering to himself. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I just lay there, numb. That night, I slept on the floor, and in the morning, he brought me coffee. Black, just the way I liked it. Said nothing about what happened, not a word. It's funny how a person can shatter you and then hand you a cup like nothing ever happened. Like that's love. Like that's what marriage is. That was the first time I thought I might actually die in that house. Not from one big moment, not from a gunshot or a fire or a broken neck, but from slow erasure, from the way he was turning me into a ghost, one bruise, one silence, one forgotten dream at a time. I thought about running. I really did. But where would I go? I had no money, no education past high school, no friends left who'd even believe me. Divorce wasn't just frowned upon back then. It was a scarlet letter. A woman who left her husband was seen as broken, rebellious, ungrateful. And more than that, I was scared. Not of being alone. I was already alone. But of what he might do if he caught me trying to leave. So I stayed. I smiled in photos. I hosted dinners. I made casseroles for the church potluck. I kept the blinds drawn and the radio low. I became a shell of a woman and tried to convince myself that shells were enough. But something deep inside me, something small and stubborn, kept breathing. That little flicker from the kitchen floor, it hadn't gone out yet. And one day, it would grow teeth. They say people don't change. Not really. But I watched Walter change. Or maybe I just finally started seeing him for who he always was, stripped of the charm and the Sunday morning smiles. It got worse after he lost his job at the hardware store. He came home one afternoon, threw his toolbox across the porch, and sat down with that blank stare I'd learned to fear. He didn't say anything at first, just drank. Drank until his hands shook and his shirt stuck to his chest from sweat. When he finally spoke, it was like his voice came from somewhere deep and rotting. "They said I don't work hard enough," he slurred. "Can you believe that? Me." I didn't say a word. I knew better by then. That night, he didn't sleep. Just sat in the kitchen with the lights off, sipping whiskey and muttering to himself. I stayed upstairs, knees pulled to my chest, listening to the clock tick and tick and tick. Every second was a drop of fear filling up my lungs. With no job, he was home all the time, watching me, questioning every move, asking what I did with the phone bill, who I talked to at the store, why the neighbor waved at me for too long. He'd pull me aside and hiss in my ear, "Don't embarrass me," like I had any power left to do anything but survive. He started locking the door from the outside when he left. Just a chain latch, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that I wasn't free. Enough to make sure I didn't get any ideas. One afternoon, I dropped a glass. Just a glass. My hands were shaking from nerves, and it slipped right out of my fingers. It shattered on the floor, loud and sharp like a scream. He came running in from the porch, eyes wild. I tried to explain, tried to say it was an accident, but he didn't want reasons. He wanted control. He grabbed my arm and dragged me to the kitchen sink, forced my hand under the cold water. "Do you see what you are?" he spat. "You're careless. You don't pay attention. You're lucky I keep you." Then he held my hand under the faucet until my skin turned raw and pink. That night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt something inside me harden, like a part of me curled up and turned to stone. I stopped trying to please him, not outwardly. I still cooked, cleaned, nodded when he spoke, but inside, I went cold, detached. I started memorizing the creaks in the floorboards, measuring the time it took him to walk from the kitchen to the front door, listening for the click of the whiskey bottle cap. I lived like prey, always alert, always quiet. Then came the dog. Walter brought home a mutt one day, some skinny little thing he found near the train tracks. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would soften him, give him something to care for, some outlet for whatever was eating him alive. I named her Millie. She was brown and white, with floppy ears and sad eyes. She followed me everywhere, slept curled up next to the stove. She was my shadow, the only living thing in that house who didn't scare me. One night, I heard her whimper, just soft, pitiful cries from the back porch. I rushed outside and found her tied to the post, shaking. Walter stood nearby, drunk, holding a switch in his hand. "She got into the trash," he said. I looked at Millie, then at the belt in his hand, and something snapped. "No," I said. My voice was small, but it was the first no I'd said in years. He stared at me, like he couldn't believe I'd spoken. "She's just a dog," I whispered. "She didn't mean any harm." He stepped forward close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You defending her now?" he growled, and before I could speak, he shoved me, hard. I hit the porch railing, my ribs slamming into the wood. The pain shot through me like lightning. I curled into myself, breathless. He left me there. That night, I crawled back inside. Millie followed. She licked my face while I cried on the kitchen floor, and I made a promise to her. I said, "I don't know how, but one day we're getting out." It was the first time I said it out loud. The first time I admitted to myself that staying wasn't just killing me, it was erasing me. The fire inside me wasn't a flicker anymore. It was embers, hot and waiting. It would take time, and more hurt than I thought I could carry. But one day, those embers would catch. One day, I would stop surviving and start fighting. There's always a moment when survival stops being enough. When breathing in and out isn't living anymore. It's just existing, minute to minute, waiting for the next blow, the next insult, the next bruise. My moment came in the middle of winter, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you wonder if you'll ever feel warm again. It started with a knock on the door. A neighbor, Mrs. Whitley, bless her heart, had come by with a pie, apple cinnamon. She said it was just to be neighborly, but the way she looked at me, I knew she saw something. Maybe the puffiness under my eye, the way my wrist was wrapped in a dish towel. Maybe she just saw the way my shoulders curled inward like I was trying to disappear. I opened the door only a crack, enough to take the pie and say thank you. She hesitated, looked past me into the house and said, "You okay, honey?" It was such a simple question, just 3 words, but they clanged in my chest like a church bell. I nodded, smiled, and said, "Of course." She didn't believe me. I closed the door, set the pie on the counter, and just stood there, staring at it. My hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the storm building inside me. That evening, Walter came home in a foul mood. He smelled like sour beer and cigarette ash. The second he walked in, I felt the air tighten. He knocked the pie off the counter without even asking where it came from. It hit the floor with a dull thud, crust crumbling like sand. "Who's been snooping around here?" he barked. I didn't answer. He grabbed my arm, the same one I'd hurt the week before, and twisted. I cried out before I could stop myself. That was it. That was the moment. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see a man. I saw something hollow, something dark, a black hole that would swallow everything I was if I let it. And I thought, if I don't leave soon, I will die here. Or worse, I'll forget who I ever was. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of the bedroom with Millie curled against my leg. I held a notebook in my lap, the only one I hadn't burned or thrown out, and I wrote just one sentence: I am still here. The next morning, I tucked the notebook into the back of the pantry behind the flower jars. I started packing little things, quietly, a spoon here, a shirt there. I hid them in an old flour sack behind the woodpile outside. I didn't know where I'd go. I had no family left, no money, but I knew I couldn't wait for a miracle. I was going to make one. But Walter, he must have sensed the shift. Abusers can smell defiance, even when you don't speak it. A few nights later, he found the notebook. I'll never forget the way his face twisted when he held it up, shaking it in the air like it was a bomb. "You writing stories now? You think this is some kind of fairy tale?" He read aloud the sentence I wrote, mocking me, laughing. Then he ripped the pages out, one by one, slow and deliberate. I reached for it. I couldn't help myself. That's when he slapped me harder than he ever had. I stumbled, hit my head on the edge of the stove, and dropped to the floor. For a few seconds, everything went blurry. I felt warmth at my temple, tasted blood again. But this time something else rose inside me. Rage. Not the scared kind, not the silent kind. Fire. I stood up, my head spinning, my voice shaking. I looked him in the eye and said, "You can break my bones, but I'm still here." He laughed, not for long. Then he turned and went upstairs. That was the last night I ever called this house a home, because that was the night I decided. If I couldn't walk out, I'd find another way. The match wouldn't come until later, much later. But the strike? It happened right then. The fire didn't start with flames. It started with one sentence in a ruined notebook, and a woman who finally said, "No more." I didn't sleep the rest of that week. Sleep felt dangerous. Like if I let myself drift off, I'd miss my chance. Like he might do something while I wasn't watching and I'd wake up to nothing, or not wake up at all. So I stayed awake. I waited. I planned. Not with maps or calendars, but with instinct. I watched his habits, noticed when he drank the most, noticed how long it took him to pass out after that third bottle, noticed which nights he didn't come home at all. I started hiding canned food behind the shed, dry socks, a flashlight, a roll of dollars I had managed to save from years of careful rationing, sewing money, grocery leftovers, even coins dropped behind the couch that I tucked away instead of turning over. I didn't tell a soul, not even the neighbor who brought the pie, not even the postman who once asked if I was okay with a look that lingered a second too long. I couldn't trust anyone, not because they were bad, but because one wrong word, one little whisper, and Walter would find out. And then, I might not live to try again. But my biggest concern wasn't me. It was Millie. She was the only soul in that house who loved me without expectation or cruelty. She was more than a dog. She was witness, comfort, and companion. She had waited out storms with me, licked tears from my cheeks, curled up on the floor beside me on nights I couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't leave her behind, and I knew. I knew he'd kill her if I left and didn't take her. So my plan had to include her. Somehow. Then, one Thursday, it happened. Walter got a call from someone down at the mill. A temp job, maybe a haul, something that would take him out of town for 2 nights. He barked the information over his shoulder, slammed the screen door, and drove off without a goodbye. My heart leapt so high in my chest I almost couldn't breathe. It was time. I waited until the sun went down, just in case. Then I moved. Fast. Quiet. No second guesses. I grabbed the sack from behind the woodpile. I stuffed Millie's leash into my coat pocket. I took only what I could carry: food, water, the money, an old photograph of my brother and me, and a note I left on the kitchen counter. It didn't say much, just, "This house is yours now, but not me. Not anymore." I locked the door behind me, not because I wanted to protect the house, but because I knew he'd come home looking for something to hit, and I wanted it to be a wall, not a person. We walked, Millie and me. No plan, no car, no map, just my legs and the darkness and the raw, knowing that anything was better than staying. We made it as far as the edge of town that night. Slept behind a church, wrapped in an old blanket, Millie curled against my stomach. I remember staring up at the stars, cold and sharp in the winter sky, and whispering, "If you're listening, Lord, if you're out there, please just give me a sign that I'm not making the biggest mistake of my life." And in the quiet that followed, Millie pressed her nose to my face and licked away the tears I hadn't even realized were falling. That was enough. The next morning, we walked some more. We reached a diner just outside town. I asked the woman behind the counter if there was any place nearby where a woman might find work, even just for the day. She didn't ask many questions, just looked at me, really looked at me, and handed me a biscuit and coffee. She pointed toward the back and said, "The dish sink could use some love." I cried right there in front of her, not because I was sad, but because for the first time in years, someone was kind without wanting anything in return. That diner became my first safe haven. The manager let me sleep in the back room for a few nights while I scrubbed floors and cleaned dishes. I never told him everything, but he didn't need the details. He saw the truth in my eyes, same way that woman did. It wasn't glamorous. I was exhausted, aching, scared every time a truck pulled up, afraid it would be him. But I was alive, and I was free. And that was everything. Freedom wasn't a feeling that came all at once. It wasn't some great thunderclap or sunrise breaking through the clouds. No, freedom was slower, quieter. It came in small moments, like the first time I stood outside in the morning without glancing over my shoulder, like the first meal I ate that wasn't cold from waiting for someone else to finish yelling. That little back room in the diner wasn't much, just a cot, a sink, and an old curtain for privacy. But to me, it was more than enough. It was mine. Nobody told me when to sleep or when to speak. Nobody raised a hand or a voice. I could breathe. Even if the air was filled with grease and bleach, it was still better than silence and rage. Millie stayed by my side every second. The cook, Big Al, tall man with hands like dinner plates, built her a little bed out of an old potato sack and a pillow, said, "A dog that loyals earned her keep." That meant everything to me. You don't forget the ones who are kind when they don't have to be. But kindness didn't stop the nightmares. I'd wake up sweating, hearing the screen door slam, hearing Walter's voice growling my name through the dark. Sometimes I'd sleep with my shoes on, just in case I had to run again. Trauma doesn't leave you all at once. It lingers. It reshapes you. It turns even safety into a question mark. I kept working. Washing dishes turned into bussing tables. Bussing turned into taking orders. Eventually, the owner's wife, Linda, let me help with the books once she saw I was good with numbers. She asked once, over pie and strong coffee, "You got family, honey?" I froze. I wanted to lie, to say something easy. But the truth came out like it had been waiting. Number? Not anymore. She nodded, didn't press. She just said, "Well, you got us now." And I cried again. I must have cried more in that diner than I had in all my years with Walter, but not out of pain, out of relief. Linda helped me get papers in my name, helped me open a bank account, my first ever. I used to stare at the little passbook at night like it was a miracle. A name on a page, my name, my money, my choices. Some weeks I still walked like I expected to be yanked backward, but over time I stood straighter. I began writing again, just a little. Notes scribbled on napkins, sentences here and there about trees and music and fear and faith. I kept them all in a cigar box under my cot. It felt silly at first, but then it started feeling like recovery, like remembering I had a voice after years of forgetting how to speak. Then came the letter. It showed up at the diner one afternoon, smudged and wrinkled, my name scribbled in block letters. No return address. Inside, 5 words. "You can't hide forever, Ellie." No signature, no explanation. But I knew that handwriting, knew it like I knew the ridges of my own palm. It was Walter. I didn't eat that night. Couldn't. The fear came rushing back, thick and black. I didn't sleep either. Just sat on the cot, Millie curled against me, heart racing like a trapped bird. I thought of leaving. Again. But then I remembered something. I wasn't the same woman I'd been. I'd built a life here. People knew me, trusted me. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't powerless. And maybe it was time I stopped running. The next morning, I walked into the sheriff's office, told him everything, not in detail and not at first, just that I had left a man who hurt me, that he might be coming, that I needed protection. The sheriff was quiet, not kind, not cruel, just still. Then he asked, "You ever file a report?" I shook my head. He sighed. "Hard to do much if there's no paper trail." I stood up to leave, but then he said, "Leave the letter. If he shows up, you call me first." It wasn't much, but it was something. I left the letter, went back to the diner, and waited. Days passed, then weeks. No sign of him. I started breathing easy again, but deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Because people like Walter, they don't give up easy. They don't like losing what they think they own. And one day, he'd come looking. I just didn't know how close the fire already was. I don't know if it was fate or just bad timing. It was a Sunday. Slow, quiet, the kind where the sun lingers on the pavement and everyone moves slower, like time forgot to wind itself forward. I had just finished wiping down the counter at the diner. Millie was napping under the stool by the door, and the smell of biscuits still floated in the air. That's when I saw him, through the window, standing across the street, arms crossed, watching. Walter. He hadn't changed much. Maybe a little grayer around the edges, but the way he stood, the way his shoulders hunched like coiled rope, I knew that stance like I knew the sound of my own heartbeat. My stomach dropped. I didn't panic, I didn't scream. I just turned, calmly, and walked into the back. I told Linda he was here. Her eyes widened. She didn't ask questions. She just locked the door and called the sheriff. For 30 minutes, I hid in the supply closet. Millie beside me, shaking as hard as I was. My hands gripped her collar so tight I didn't notice the nail digging into my palm. I kept thinking, he found me. After all this time, he found me. And now it's over. But it wasn't. Because when the sheriff arrived, Walter was gone. Vanished like a ghost. No note, no confrontation. Just gone. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, playing out every possible scenario. I thought of leaving town, disappearing again. But something inside me said, no more running. The next day, I bought a lock for the diner's back door and started sleeping with a fire poker next to the cot. Not out of revenge, but survival. Then, 3 days later, the fire happened. It was late, past midnight. I'd stayed late doing inventory, and Linda had gone home early. The kitchen was dark, the front lights off, and Millie and I were curled up in the back, her head resting on my ankle. That's when I smelled it. Smoke. Not a kitchen smell, not grease or ovens. Real smoke. Dangerous smoke. I sat up fast, heart pounding. The air was hazy and there was an orange glow coming from the hall. I grabbed Millie and ran. By the time we reached the back door, the flames were already creeping along the walls. I turned to look, just once, and saw it. Gasoline cans. 3 of them. I knew. Walter had been here. He didn't want to talk. Didn't want to drag me back. He just wanted to erase me. Burn down everything I'd built. But he'd underestimated one thing. I wasn't the same woman anymore. I kicked open the back door and ran into the night, coughing and clutching Millie. I didn't stop until I reached the diner next door. I banged on the door until my fists ached, The fire blazed behind us, flames licking the windows, the roof groaning under the heat. But we were out. We were safe. The firefighters came. The sheriff? The news? They said it might have been faulty wiring, but I knew better. And so did the sheriff. He took my statement, asked questions, promised to look into it. But I never saw Walter again. Not in person. A few months later, I got a letter. One sentence. I hope it was worth it. No return address, no name. But the handwriting was his, and that was the last time he ever reached out. I don't know if he's dead. I don't care. Because that night, watching the flames tear through the building where I'd reclaimed my life, I realized something. He didn't win. He destroyed a building. Not me. I was still standing. I found work again. Another diner. Another town. Eventually, I saved enough to rent a small house. Just me and Millie in peace. I built a life from scratch. One without fear. One where the only fire was the one I lit in my own hearth. Starting over isn't as easy as folks make it sound. They talk like it's a fresh coat of paint, a clean slate. But that's not how it works. When you leave a life like mine, when you claw your way out of it, you don't step into a new life squeaky clean. You drag your past with you like a shadow you can't scrub off. You learn to live with it, to build around it. The new town was smaller, quieter. Nobody asked many questions, which was exactly what I needed. I found a room to rent in a widow's house. Mrs. Peterson, a woman with sharp eyes and a kind heart. She didn't ask about the bruises that hadn't fully faded or why I flinched when someone knocked too hard. She just gave me a room and fresh sheets and said, "You do what you need to, sweetheart." I found a job at a library. It paid almost nothing, but it was calm, peaceful. I liked the quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't feel dangerous. The smell of old books, the sound of paper turning, the hush of people who came there just to sit and think. I hadn't had that kind of stillness in years. Millie stayed by my side like she always had. I'd leave the window cracked for her while I worked. She'd wait on the porch or nap under the shade tree in the backyard. People in town knew her before they knew me. "That's Ellie's dog," they'd say. "She don't bark much, but she's loyal as anything." And me? I kept my head down, smiled politely, made no waves, because even though Walter was gone, even though the fire had burned down everything that bound me to him, I still didn't feel safe. I don't know if it was trauma or just habit, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was out there, watching, that one day he'd show up again. So I stayed cautious, guarded. I never told anyone the whole story, not the folks at the library, not Mrs. Peterson, not even the man who came into my life a few years later. His name was Thomas. He was quiet, like me, a widower. He came in every Tuesday to check out books about gardening and birds, always wore a button-down shirt tucked too tight into his jeans, and carried a thermos of black coffee. He asked me out 3 times before I said yes. It wasn't that I wasn't interested. It was that I didn't know how to be with someone without expecting pain. But he was patient. He brought me tea instead of flowers, sat on my porch and listened instead of talking. He never asked what happened before I moved here. He just waited for me to give what I could, when I could. And slowly, carefully, I let him in. We'd sit under the stars with Millie between us, talk about birds and weather and nothing at all. It was the first time I'd laughed, really laughed, and in years, and it scared me. Happiness felt like a trick mirror, like any second I'd look into it and see Walter's face staring back. One night, Thomas took my hand, gently like he was asking permission, and said, "You don't have to tell me everything, but I want you to know nothing you say will change the way I see you." I didn't answer, but I didn't let go either. We were never husband and wife, not officially. I couldn't go through that again. The paperwork, the vows, the binding of it all. But we were more than friends, more than companions. We were survivors, both of us, in our own ways. And for the first time in my life, I felt calm. I still kept the notebook, or what was left of it, pages torn, some rewritten. I filled it with small things, quotes, thoughts, pieces of poems I remembered from my girlhood. I'd read them to Millie on quiet mornings, her ears twitching while I sipped tea on the porch. But I never wrote about Walter, not directly. I was afraid that putting it down would give it power again. So instead, I carried the memories in silence. That was my way of surviving, of healing, by not naming the monster anymore, by living a life he had no part of. I worked at the library for 20 years, retired when my hands started to tremble too much to shelve the books. People came to my little retirement party with casseroles and cards, called me Sweet Miss Ellie and said the library wouldn't be the same without me. They didn't know the half of it. But maybe that was the point. Some stories aren't meant to be public. Some scars are meant to stay covered. And sometimes silence isn't fear. It's just peace. Years passed like wind through the trees, gentle, unnoticed, and suddenly gone. After the library, I kept busy. Volunteered at the local church thrift shop, baked pies for fundraisers, sent birthday cards to neighbors and their kids. People started calling me Miss Ellie from the corner house, the kind with the porch swing and the flower beds that never stayed weeded, but always looked like they belonged in a painting. They knew me as a kind old woman with a loyal dog and a sweet smile, and that's all they needed to know. But the truth never really left me. It lived just beneath the surface. Every time someone knocked on my door too hard, my heart skipped. Every time I heard heavy boots on wooden steps, I had to stop myself from holding my breath, even after all those years, even after I built a life filled with love, friendship, and safety, because trauma doesn't have an expiration date. Millie got older too. Her muzzle went gray and she started sleeping more than anything else. She moved slower, needed help getting up the steps. But her eyes, oh, her eyes, they never stopped watching me with that same deep loyalty. She passed away one spring morning, curled up in her bed by the door. I buried her under the maple tree in the backyard, put wildflowers there, and a little stone I carved her name into with shaking hands. That was the first time I truly cried in years, because she wasn't just a dog. She was proof that I had survived. She had walked beside me through the worst of it. She'd watched the flames rise and the walls fall and the new life begin. When she left, I felt the silence again. But this time, it didn't feel like fear. It felt like grief. Real, earned grief. After Millie passed, Thomas and I grew even closer. We spent more evenings together, sharing coffee, old music, and slow conversations about nothing important. He never pushed me, never asked for more than I was ready to give. One night, I handed him the cigar box, the one with my poems, the letters, the half-burned pieces of my story. He didn't open it right away, just held it in his lap while we listened to the radio. When he finally did, he didn't say anything for a long while. Then he looked at me and said, "You've carried this alone for too long." And I realized he wasn't just reading my story. He was helping me hold it. It was the first time I didn't feel ashamed of what had happened. I wasn't that girl on the kitchen floor anymore. I was a woman who'd made it through, who'd chosen to live, who'd planted gardens over scars and named her peace after a dog. But still, I didn't tell the whole world. I didn't go around shouting it from rooftops, not because I was afraid, but because I'd made peace with the silence, with the choice to protect the life I had now instead of constantly revisiting the pain that built it. There's power in that. People talk about healing like it's this big, dramatic moment, a revelation, a breakdown, a spotlight. But for me, healing looked like laundry on the line, warm soup in winter, laughter that didn't come with fear. It looked like not flinching when someone said my name. It looked like growing tomatoes in the backyard and trusting the sun to do what it always does, rise. I watched other women in town go through their own storms. I could see it in their eyes, the way they hesitated before speaking, the way they smiled too wide at church and never stayed long after the service. I saw myself in them, but I never told them my story. I just sat beside them, brought them tea, offered my porch swing on hot afternoons, and sometimes That was enough. Sometimes being seen, truly seen, by someone who understands is all the saving a person needs. I grew old in that house. Thomas passed quietly one autumn in his sleep. I held his hand until the last breath left his chest. I buried him beside Millie, and for the first time since Walter, I knew what real love felt like. It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. It was safe. And safety, that was everything. I lived alone after that. Slower, quieter, but still alive. Still Ellie, the woman who had walked through fire, literally and otherwise, and came out whole on the other side. People ask why I never remarried, why I stayed alone, and I just smile and say, I had enough love to last a lifetime. They think I'm talking about Thomas, but really, I'm talking about myself, because somewhere along the way, I stopped surviving for someone else and started living for me. It's a strange thing, getting old. You spend so much of your life just trying to get through the next day, and then one morning you wake up and your hands don't work quite right. Your knees ache when it rains, and every memory feels like a page in a book only you can read. People treat you different when you're old, like you're gentle porcelain, like your stories are quaint, like your pain was from a different time, and somehow that makes it easier to swallow. But pain doesn't care how many decades have passed. Trauma doesn't respect calendars. I used to sit out on the porch in the evenings, rocking slowly in the old chair Thomas built for me, and I'd watch the neighborhood kids ride their bikes past the picket fence. I'd see their mothers, strong, opinionated women, talking freely, laughing loudly, raising their daughters to be bold. And I'd smile, because that's the world I wanted to see before I left this one. But I'd also think about the things I never told anyone, the memories still folded inside me like letters no one ever read. There were times when I wondered, did I do the right thing staying quiet all these years? Did my silence protect me, or did it protect him? The truth is, it did both. But there's another truth, too. I wasn't silent because I was weak. I was silent because I was surviving. Because the world back then didn't make room for stories like mine. A woman who left her husband was shamed. A woman who fought back was dangerous. A woman who said, "He hurt me," was often told, "You must have done something to deserve it." So I stayed quiet, and I lived. And sometimes that's the bravest thing a woman can do. Still, I wrote. Not for anyone else, just for me. Dozens of notebooks over the years, stacked under my bed, tucked in drawers, pages yellowed with time. Some were filled with memories, the good, the bad, and the ones that still made my throat tighten when I read them out loud. Others were filled with advice, notes to the girl I once was, notes to the woman I had become, notes to the daughter I never had. And one notebook, one slim, worn book, I kept in a locked tin box wrapped in a scarf from my mother. That was the one that held everything, names, dates, the fire, the letter, the truth. I thought about burning it more than once, but I couldn't, because someday I knew someone might need to know, maybe not for justice, but for understanding, for proof that survival isn't always loud, that sometimes the quietest people have the loudest stories. It was around my 80th birthday when my great-granddaughter came to visit. Sarah, 15, full of fire and questions and the kind of light that makes you believe in second chances. We sat on the porch with iced tea, the sun setting slow behind the trees. She looked at me with those curious eyes and asked, "Grandma Ellie, have you ever been in love?" And something inside me cracked open, because I knew, right then, that maybe it was time to speak. Maybe not every word, maybe not every bruise, but something. So I told her about Thomas, about Millie, about starting over, about how love isn't always a firework. Sometimes it's just someone who hands you tea and lets you sleep without fear. She listened, really listened. Then she asked, "Did someone ever hurt you?" And I didn't lie. I said yes, but I'm still here. She nodded like she understood more than her age should allow. And I realized maybe all this silence wasn't for nothing. Maybe I'd been waiting for the right moment, for the right ears, for someone who wouldn't pity me, but learn from me. That night, I opened the tin box, took out the notebook, read it again, cover to cover, and instead of shame, I felt pride. Not for what happened, but for what I did after, for how I survived, for the life I built from ashes and nothing, for the woman I became in the end. They say time heals all wounds. That's not true. Time teaches you how to carry them, how to walk with them, how to laugh even when they ache. But healing takes more than time. It takes truth. It takes naming the things you were once too scared to say out loud. That's what I'm doing now. I've lived a full life, a quiet one, but full. And yet, even now, sitting here in my favorite chair with the late sun slipping through the curtains, there are nights when I still hear him. Not his voice, but the echo of control, the memory of being made small, the long silence that stretched across decades. But you know what I hear louder? My own voice. Strong, a little shaky, sure. These bones are old after all, but certain, grounded, honest. I tell this story now not for vengeance, not to hurt the dead or expose the past. I tell it because silence can only protect for so long. At some point, silence becomes a wall, and I've spent most of my life hiding behind walls. Now, at the edge of it all, I want to open the windows, let the air in, let the truth out. I've learned that survival isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just breathing through the next hour. Sometimes it's making soup when all you want to do is cry. Sometimes it's telling a girl at the bus stop that she's worth more than the man who bruised her heart. And sometimes it's sitting down at 84 years old and finally saying, he was a monster, and I made it out. I used to carry shame, deep, heavy shame. I thought staying made me weak. I thought loving him, even in the beginning, meant something was broken in me. But I know now, that girl I was, she did the best she could with what she had. She wasn't weak. She was surviving the only way she knew how. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. That's courage. If you've made it this far into my story, you know now why I kept quiet, why I smiled when I didn't want to, why I built a life that didn't leave room for questions. It wasn't fear that kept me silent all those years. It was protection, not just for me, but for the world I tried to build after the fire, for the neighbors who saw me as kind, not broken, for the children who never heard yelling through my walls, for the girl I never had but always carried in my heart, the daughter, the granddaughter, the great-granddaughter. I chose silence because it allowed me to give them a version of the world that felt safe, and I still believe that was love in its own way. But now I'm ready for truth. And truth isn't just what happened. Truth is what I became. A woman who learned to trust again. A woman who danced barefoot in her kitchen with a dog and a man who didn't raise his voice. A woman who grew tomatoes and wrote poems and taught herself how to sleep without the lights on. That's my legacy. Not Walter. Not the fire. Me. And if you're hearing my voice right now, wherever you are, maybe sitting alone, maybe nursing your own bruises, visible or invisible, please know this. You are not what happened to you. You are what you do next. You are every small, quiet decision to keep going, to make breakfast, to fold laundry, to pet the dog, to call a friend, to write your story, even if no one reads it but you. And if you're still trapped, in fear, in pain, in silence, I won't tell you to just leave. I know it's not that simple, but I will tell you this. There's a life on the other side of that door, one with light, one with peace, one where your name belongs to you and no one else. And one day, if you can, take the first step, even if it's just writing one sentence, even if it's just whispering to the sky, I am still here, because you are, and that matters. If this story reached you, If you made it to the end, please tell me where you're watching from. Not for numbers, not for likes. Just so I know I'm not alone. Just so some part of me, sitting here on this quiet porch, can feel the warmth of strangers who listened, really listened, to the story I carried in silence for most of my life. Because in the end, that's what I've learned. Survival is messy. Healing is slow. But being heard, even once, can feel like freedom.